I think Singapore is a small but smart nation. It has managed to sort of manage superpower rivalry for a long while.
Right.
And I think they're also trying to sort of diversify their relationships to see, to bet on what they see as the next big thing. So I think India sort of convinced their partners, and under the current administration of Prime Minister Wong, I do think that, you know, the constituency of Friends of India is certainly on the uphill.
Hello, this is Strat News Global. You're on The Gist, and I'm Tripti Nath. We have in our studio today a very promising scholar, Shruti Pandalai, who is a fellow at the Southeast Asia and Oceania Center at the Manohar Parrikar Institute for Defence Studies and Analyses in New Delhi. Shruti tracks India's foreign and security policy with a focus on evolving geopolitics in the Indo-Pacific Quad and sharp power contestations. She's also part of the new emerging groups, the US State Department's Quad Fellow under the International Visitor Leadership Program 2022, the Young Strategist Forum in Japan 2023, and the Perth US Asia Center Indo-Pacific Leaders Program 2024, to name just a few. Welcome, Shruti, to our studio. Thanks indeed for making it. A lot has been said insofar as the historic value of Prime Minister Narendra Modi's just concluded Brunei Darussalam visit is concerned. So why do you think no Indian Prime Minister thought of visiting Brunei for 40 years from the time it attained independence? And let us not forget that Mr. Modi has been steering India for a decade. So why did he choose to visit Brunei only now, within 90 days in his third term as Prime Minister?
Thanks, Tripti, first of all, for having me here at Strat News Global.
It's our pleasure and privilege.
Thank you. So jumping right in, I think you have to see the visit in the context of the current sort of polycrisis globally, and also India's vision in terms of stepping up engagement. So if I were to take like a broad view of what's going on globally right now, you have the Russia-Ukraine crisis, you have what's happening in the Middle East or West Asia as we know it, you have racketing up of tensions in the South China Sea, and you also have all of this happening as US-China sort of strategic competition is polarizing global governance. So you have a lot of countries within the Indo-Pacific that are looking for solutions beyond binaries. And how is India therefore has stepped up by, you know, not just after its G20 presidency, but by mainstreaming the Indo-Pacific concept to look at geographies like ASEAN, where it has always spoken about, you know, the quality of the relationship in terms of, you know, looking east to now acting east under Prime Minister Modi. And therefore, ASEAN stepping up engagement, leaning into ASEAN and actually saying that, look, there is an alternative available and India is willing to burden share and bring its local sort of templates and solutions to global problems to regions and partners. You asked me very specifically why it took 40 years to get to Brunei. I think you have to understand maybe historically we are also looking at resources and context at that point of time. Currently, when you're talking about stepping up engagement with ASEAN, you've concluded a comprehensive strategic partnership. Brunei is part of the ASEAN grouping, a very significant, small but significant country, but also in a very significant geography. You're completing 40 years of diplomatic sort of relationship. Also, there is a commercial aspect to it. You know, we are increasingly dependent on Brunei. I won't call it dependent, but we've increasingly cultivated a relationship with Brunei in terms of energy, commerce. So I think a lot of those reasons tell you why Prime Minister Modi has decided to visit Brunei. And also remember that the monarch of Brunei has actually made a lot of state visits, including the last one, I think, in 2018. So I think it was high time that, you know, when we are saying we're looking at deepening our relationship with ASEAN, we're the bridge builders in this sort of polarized world. you are looking at a strategic location, the South China Sea.
Talking of building bridges, I think our Indian diaspora plays an extraordinary role there, and the Prime Minister also interacted with members of the Indian community, which he always likes doing.
That's right.
At the inauguration of the Chancery premises, and he also visited the iconic Omar Ali Saifuddin Mosque, named after the 20th Sultan of Brunei, the father of the current Sultan, Haji Hassan al Bolkiah. Please forgive me for my pronunciation, and considered as the architect of modern Brunei. So, during the current visit, both countries have elevated their ties to enhanced partnership. What does this signify for India?
Well, you have to look at it in a couple of, like I said, the larger context is, of course, you're renewing your commitment to ASEAN, saying that no country, big or small, is going to, is going to be differentiated in terms of agendas for India's outreach. So this is saying, talking to the nation, to this grouping as a collective, and saying that your priorities are going to be the basis for us extending our outreach. So if you look at the defense partnership agreements that have been reached, you look at what we are talking in terms of cybersecurity resilience, what we have done in terms of agreements on space and using India's sort of competency to help this nation. I think it tells you what the kind of sort of partnership you're looking to build. And circling back quickly to your question on the diaspora, I think what the Indian governments have done in the past, and particularly in terms of Prime Minister Modi's administration and their articulation of the importance of connecting diaspora to India's core interests in a lot of global affairs, is getting more traction as well. And I think, Brunei being an Islamic nation, the fact that your Chancery is talking about sort of imbibing some of these syncretic traditions tells you also the kind of image India wants to portray in a sort of polarized environment. So I think there is a level of symbolism to the trip, but there's also trying to establish sort of habits of cooperation, if you will, that will prove fruitful in the way forward.
Interesting interpretation, especially the bit of syncretism. It has also been decided to set up a joint working group to enhance defense ties between India and Brunei. What does this entail really? And you talked of defense cooperation, so they discussed signing a space cooperation agreement also, apart from expanding trade ties and commercial linkages.
I think in essence the idea is to say that, what are the deliverables that India has built competency on, whether it's capacity and capability building, training of personnel, in terms of space, technologies that are what we label as a force for good, or technologies with a positive agenda, and how they can be sort of extended in terms of the outcomes to our partner countries, is, I think, something, the same pattern that has been followed by Indian diplomacy globally in its outreach. So I don't think there's anything dramatically different in the playbook, but I think it's to say that, like I said, it circles back to the point in the beginning that no country, big or small, is outside of India's outreach. We saw what Prime Minister did with the Pacific Islands in the past. So you're looking at smaller geographies, but more important in the scale of things now, given the rising of tensions in various geographies.
But he's also creating some kind of a legacy by going to countries like this, where no Indian Prime Minister has set foot in a long time.
Sure, absolutely. I mean, I think it also tells you how India's agenda is expanded. Whether it's countries in Latin America, whether, like I said, countries in the Pacific, which earlier have had restricted sort of Indian attention or presence. I think primarily due to our fears of overreaching in terms of our resources available. You see a recalibration. You see a renewed importance given, and the fact that we are saying our vision for the Indo-Pacific is inclusive, the fact that no country, big or small, is excluded from it, and this is not a sort of containment idea, but it's rather an idea of preserving global commons. I think that it sort of fits in with that pattern.
So the Act East policy is a signature initiative of Prime Minister Narendra Modi. I mean, he kind of renamed it from Look East to Act East, I think in Myanmar in 2014, in his very soon in his first term. Does the 3-day visit to Brunei and Singapore carry a message of reaffirmation of India's Act East policy being followed now for almost 10 years?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's also a question of also trying to prove to these countries where, especially the ASEAN. ASEAN is often considered the anchor of the Indo-Pacific. The platitudes are written about its centrality. But often, I think because of the dynamism of groups like the Quad, China's ability to create this sort of narrative that groupings like the Quad have the ability to transform the region dramatically because it's a version of the Asian NATO. You've sort of seen the waxing and waning of interest from regions like Southeast Asia and perhaps worry and suspicion of what the agenda of these groupings entails. So India, as an active member of the Quad, on its own footing of its mainstreaming of the Indo-Pacific policy or vision rather, is looking up to step up engagement. So you see whether it's Brunei or you look at the host of agreements that it has signed with Singapore. You're trying to, I'm sorry I'm repeating this word, but what is the kind of or the quality of the cooperation beyond the China question? Of course, you have to manage China and sort of, collectively ensure deterrence and security is maintained. But how do you transform how people in the region view each other and connect that, sort of make those lasting sort of relationships work? Because for that you need economic ties to sort of entrench themselves and be part of each other's growth story. I think that's the agenda that's taking New Delhi forward in a lot of these relationships.
India and Singapore have also decided to elevate the relationship to a comprehensive strategic partnership. So that way I think his visit in 3 days to 2 countries has or is turning out to be, as he wraps up his visit, rather fruitful. What would this mean for India?
Sure. I mean, if you just go through the list of sort of, I was just reading the statement coming out today on what are the agreements that you've reached. Today, everyone talks about semiconductors, as being the frontier of strategic competition. But if you look at how we've been approaching our sort of semiconductor expertise, it is to say that, okay, we have great relationships with a lot of countries who are friendly to us. Let's leverage these relationships to build our strength. So today you have an MOU with Singapore, which aims to sort of boost these joint efforts. And you're looking at developing, I think, what they're calling a semiconductor cluster that cultivates talent in both design and manufacturing and also helps pool in Singapore investment into India. And I was looking into facts especially to understand how Singapore could be a game changer. And according to the data I have, that Singapore accounts for 10% of the global semiconductor output, 5% of the fabrication capacity, and 20% of the semiconductor equipment production, with top 15 companies based out of there. So you understand now why India is building in this relationship and hoping for the investment to come through to building our own capacity. Similarly, on digital technology, I know, there's been a lot of excitement in the bilateral relationship as to what India can do and how Singapore can help us scale up on the digital public infrastructure front. But what you also see, and for me it was important to see, that apart from DPI, cybersecurity and 5G, everyone talks about quantum and computing and all of that. I thought the important point here to understand was how India was trying to talk to the Singapore counterparts to cooperate on upskilling and reskilling of workers in the digital domain. So which is going to be very important again for us back home, to build our own capacity and to ensure migration and mobility of high-skilled workers. So I think, a lot of those sort of outputs are significant. And given the short duration of the trip, I think, the groundwork was laid for it with the interministerial visit a few days.
The 4-star cabinet ministers, right. So, Prime Minister Modi, with his business acumen, also announced the setting up of an Invest India office in Singapore. And it is worth noting that last year, Singapore was the biggest foreign investor in India. In 2022, according to MEA figures, Ministry of External Affairs figures, Singapore had invested nearly $160 million in India. and this is huge, you know. So I think his visit will also, and he's also had meetings with CEOs of Singaporean companies where they have had an opportunity to hear from him firsthand about India's reform story, political stability, etc., which are very key ingredients for any prospective investor who wants to know the business climate in the country, whether it's favorable or not. And to what extent will this kind of an interaction, pump in more investment in India?
I think this has been a continued focus of Prime Minister Modi's administration, and when you're tracking a developing story today, sometimes figures jump out, and
right.
I saw a headline which spoke about this, that there is a active sort of demonstration of India's capacity to absorb capital, and therefore development in terms of our technology, startups, and how people need to come and invest there. But I also read that as Prime Minister Modi visited Singapore, one of their real estate massive real estate companies promised to double their investment in India to 14.8 billion, which is quite a massive investment, which tells you that, I think the talks went well. There is confidence that India's growth story, despite its many sort of complications at home, is going to be something that people should invest in and take forward. And quite frankly, I think Singapore is a small but smart nation. It's managed to sort of manage superpower rivalry for a long while.
Right.
And I think they're also trying to sort of diversify their relationships to see, to bet on what they see as the next big thing. So I think India sort of convinced their partners, and under the current administration of Prime Minister Wong, I do think that, the constituency of Friends of India is certainly on the uphill.
Right. India has also said that it wants to replicate the semiconductor ecosystem that Singapore has built over the years. So Prime Minister Modi went along with his Singaporean counterpart Lawrence Wong to AEM Holdings, a leading company of Singapore in the semiconductor space and electronics. And I'm sure he will come back with some very exciting ideas to execute in India. But do you think it will be easy for India to do so?
Well, I'm not an expert on the setting up of semiconductor, but I think I think the question that it boils down to is that if India is going to be part of the conversations, the resupplying, sort of rewiring of supply chains of many of these emerging and critical technologies, that do we actually have a choice not to sort of, build up our ecosystem to the level that can absorb and be the center of global demand? I think that's the moot decision that we have to take. And having said that, I think we have done a lot in terms of our PLI schemes, what we've done with Foxconn and Apple to ensure that that sort of ecosystem is sort of pushed top down, so that many of the states in our countries look at this as an opportunity over a period of a couple of decades, but something that will become a frontier of what India sees as its USP. So I don't think it's a question of whether we'll be able to do it. It's a question of how quickly we can do it and how well we can do it, I think.
Sure. External Affairs Minister S. Jaishankar said in an interview to Strait Times that India-Singapore bilateral ties need to become more contemporary. Would you agree with this perception?
Well, there is, I feel like in any strategic relationship, first of all, the foreign minister of India is always right.
Of course. But, a career diplomat as well.
But I think the larger sort of point is that in any relationship, there's a waxing and waning of interests, and sometimes you find yourself at odds because, like I said, when the conversation on the Quad was picking up, I remember being at the Shangri-La dialogue just a couple of years ago, where the defense minister turned around and said, we have not got a problem with the Quad, but it's all about reassurance. You have to reassure us what the agenda is and the ambit is. And I think what we've done is a good job of reassuring that, our intentions are as to creating new avenues for cooperation. We are ready to build the momentum, and we are ready to walk the talk on a lot of the bilateral conversations that have been ongoing. So I think, if you look at the ambit of declarations that have come out, whether it's, building collective capacity on maritime security, whether it's the digital public infrastructure front, whether it's the semiconductor front, whether it's the collaboration of the education sector, I think there are a lot of avenues that are ripe for the picking. I think it's about, walking that last mile on delivery.
So on a lighter note, but with some very grave implications, I'd like to ask you, on the opening day of a Singapore visit, we saw the Prime Minister beating drums, as he did in Japan in 2014, and building a personal rapport with the people there in his characteristic style. Was he also trying to give some kind of a message to China, which has very good terms with Singapore?
That's when I tell you I quit my media hat many years ago. So I don't look at everything with the eye on China lens. Let's just hope that the relationship stands on its own merit, while circumstances like managing China continue to nudge us forward. I'll leave it at that.
Thank you so much, Shruti. Very kind of you to have made it to our studio, and I'm sure our viewers will gain a lot from your insight and your very perceptive remarks. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Shruti, for having me. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody, for watching The Gist. We are back with a big bang. Please follow us on all social media posts and YouTube. Thank you very much.